What's up, everybody?
What's up? Good afternoon. Good evening.
And good evening. Awesome. Well, let's talk data engineering. We haven't done this for 2 weeks now, but glad to have you back, Chris. Always a joy. So what you been up to lately?
Trying to get home. That's the main thing. It's been tough when plans change. But tomorrow, I am going back. I've got a negative COVID test. Fortunately, obviously, so I am able to go home tomorrow.
Awesome. Well, congrats on that. So where are you at right now?
I'm at a friend's villa in Ibiza, so away from the madness, and seeing how the other half live. The good half.
Yeah. Me too. That's what I do when I'm there too. Cool. So, what's been on your mind recently with data engineering? Anything you want to talk about?
Yeah, I think the main thing at the moment is like the balance of value versus foundations and automation. It's like it's how you build up that that solid, documented, regimented process. But at the same time, getting the business the data they need to get the value they get out of it to make money. So, but it's working out how you can get to that route, but not end up with like a tsunami of requests that you can't deal with because now, everything's still manual and you haven't got the correct automation in place. So, I think that's something I see as a challenge some places. So. But yeah, that's been on my mind as well as other things, but that's one of the things.
Right. It's funny, like Aaron and I were talking about this just today after you left, Joe. So Aaron is the new member of our team coming on shortly. I think you've met him on another call, Chris. Okay. He was talking about how they have this infrastructure. They would use Apache NiFi to kind of create draft data processes, like if they just needed to move data quickly. And inevitably what would happen is they would draft it and then people would say, oh, well, this is useful, so just leave it in place. And then, of course, their NiFi cluster would just be completely overloaded after a while.
It is. How you get that path and keep the stakeholders happy, but also make sure you keep the governance team happy, you keep the business team happy, you keep your developers happy. They're doing the right thing. It's tough, isn't it? It's tough.
Yeah. What are some things that you found that work?
I think that community thing, building that community at the beginning to get that understanding, and I think I've always tried and use different business initiatives to get that little piece. So if you've got them doing something, use that as a vehicle to get level 1 in or whatever, and then use that community to communicate it exists. Would you like to try it? Would you get it? It gives you this value. And then I think if you try and force it on people and you do that right, this is how we're working, this is how we're doing it, and they haven't felt the pain yet, they think, we can do this ourselves. We're engineers, we know everything. And a lot of them do, but some things are, that there's ways of working or processes or things that have to be done in certain ways to make it actually work, which is not the technical aspect. It's sometimes environmental.
Right. What does the word value mean to you? It's something I think when Matt and I were talking about this, I think it was this week even or whatever. And I was talking about it the other day too with a group of engineers, but the word value kept coming up. I brought it up on one occasion actually, and it's like, well, adding value is good. Then I started to question, okay, so geez, Joe, like what kind of value are you talking about?
Yeah, I think there's probably different. With a business catalog of it, you'd have different people that have a different definition of what value is, and probably coming up with a common metric that matches your whole company would be impossible. But there's different elements. So obviously profit, so that's adding value. I mean, the other thing is retaining team, so you're retaining the knowledge. I think the other thing of value is being able to work quicker or faster later. So I like to use the term, you slow down to speed up. So by spending time looking at things, stepping back a little bit and going, we can combine these two things. We could reuse that. Or, by the way, you're replicating the same data as this person over here. Do you want to have the same data? And so that's that's one of the ways of trying to address it. But
that's totally right. I mean, I think of Amazon, for instance, and when Jeff Bezos there was the API mandate, there was the decision to build AWS. They could have just focused on like, hey, let's try to be profitable for Amazon retail for the next 6 months. And those were like very long-term investments that obviously have paid off massively and completely changed the IT space. And most of us aren't focusing on building the next AWS, but we do have long-term initiatives that we can invest in that are going to make a big difference in the future, but maybe cost a lot of resources the next 6 months.
Yeah. But I think if you ask an engineer what about the value, it'll be, maybe what framework he's built or something like that.
Right.
So in his view, the value is, look how great it is, and look, I've done this, I've got a YAML configuration, the rest of it. And then you point out, you could use an alternative replication tool, maybe like Airbyte or something like that. So it's great, well done, but it exists. So you haven't actually added value, maybe to your own knowledge, but not to the business.
Mm-hmm.
Not that I've ever seen that happen before.
Never, ever would data engineers be interested in technology for technology's sake, or just building something from scratch because it's fun.
Yeah.
No, we'd never do anything like that.
No, never.
That's interesting.
Yeah,
there's always the accounting notion of value too, right? So, and that's kind of where I would I think naively approach the topic of value as well. What's the direct cost of this? How would I attribute the cost of this initiative, right? Sometimes it's hard though. I mean, it kind of sometimes runs into the old saying, like, what's the ROI of putting your socks on?
Yeah. Okay. Like the customer lifecycle management. Yeah. How can you actually equate that in the same way of the value of the work you're doing? It's like an internal view of that, which is very hard to achieve. But I think to the point earlier about AWS, and they weren't looking at just making each thing profitable. He had a view of where that was going to go. So once collectively it became very profitable, but individually, if you looked at the balance sheet as on the cost center, they probably weren't making any money. So I think that's where the strategy view comes into it as well. Is someone needs to be having that vision, that high level strategy of this is the way we're going. And these things all add to that. I don't care if that one costs me that money because this adds me value later, which sometimes isn't clear to maybe the people on the ground or the developers actually working on it.
Right. Yeah, it's all about perspective. We got a question. Ask DevOps. What's up? Always appreciate the questions. Ask DevOps asks, in the examples you shared, would having data infrastructure team help? Because they're more focused on infra plus automation and DevOps practices. Any thoughts?
Yeah, very nicely led into some other things that I was going to talk about. So it's that ability to be able to deploy that code and have that automation there as well. But it's where the infrastructure part becomes maybe the database change management part. So using Terraform, CloudFormation for maybe your AWS locations or your syncs or your network things. But then what do you use when it goes internally to the database platform for your role management, for your user management, for then going on further, what you use for your deployment of your code for your environments as well. So you might move into Liquibase or Flyway or Skitch, or schema change is another one out there as well. So not to show a preference or anything like that. I have a view, but call me. It's that whole lot. It's the whole piece end to end. So it's the infrastructure part leading on to the role part, leading on to the actual code deployment part as well, and that needs an engineering focus. I mean, sorry to go, but Joe, we talked about it so much about how the engineering roles change. So you need to separate those teams into that ingest part where they are more DevOps focused, more automation focused, and then the other ones that are doing that modeling, building those data apps that have the business context. They understand how it all stitches together. They understand reusing conform dimensions. Or we can get onto data modeling in a minute, but I'll pause for a minute before we get onto that subject.
Yeah, what do you think, Matt?
Yeah, I mean, I think It definitely, in many cases, if you have a large organization, makes sense to move some of these responsibilities out into a common team. Going back to the value question, I think it's also critical to kind of steer them in the right direction, because there's a tendency, if I'm an engineer, then I always want to do engineering stuff. And sometimes you lose sight of what the really high value work is, and maybe some low value work of like just reinventing the wheel that's not so important. And it's tricky, right? Because you need leadership that understands the technical part, but can also kind of guide the team and steer them in the right direction so they're doing right by the business.
Although, what I find interesting is in the conversations with DevOps, for example, right? Like DevOps is very much the decentralization of ops practices into development teams. And so at some point, I'm kind of wondering, well, I mean, do you need like an infrastructure team per se, or should that be democratized and self-serve ideally?
I think you need like that supporting expertise that provides that, but what they should be doing is providing that self-serve frameworks, templates that they go out, show the people how to use it, maybe consolidate them, ensuring that they're up to date and that they're shared across them as a central repository. This is our standards, this is how we do it. Coaching, encouraging them to do that rather than everything going through them. I've seen it so many times that as soon as you have that infrastructure team, then after that you've got your cloud platform foundation team, then after that you've got your development team that's going afterwards. You've got three layers. Sprint planning is a nightmare. You've got not clear roles, clear understanding of the lines between them all. So I think they do need to be a supporting team, definitely a team, but not going through them and being the gatekeepers of everything. Promoting automation.
Right. Yeah, because I just see the more teams means more gatekeeping, means more kind of balkanization as well. And so that's sort of the trade-off, really. And if you wanted to add value, it becomes, in some ways you start balkanizing value, right? Because now, well, my value is different than your value, and I'm adding more value than your team. So it becomes like that. So I could see. I have mixed thoughts about this. So, but Ask DevOps always asks great questions. So,
thank you. So. And does this come back to that notion of like architecture? I think we've spent a lot of time talking about what architecture is and what an architect is. And one notion of that is that they are sort of this guiding force. It's not command and control, but it is like train on best practices, kind of check in and audit what you're doing as individual teams to make sure that you're not going to create tech debt or security problems in the future.
Yeah.
We're all really quiet, thinking hard about this, huh?
That's right. It seems like it.
Yay. Well, cool. On that cheery note, anything else in your mind, Chris?
Well, yeah. I mean, it started data modeling was leading on to that. Deploying that code out there the best way, and obviously I'm old school. I've been there for the Kimball, the Inman, read the book. Probably both editions. Now it's a good doorstop. Things have moved on there. You've got Data Vault. You've got the additional sort of data types that have obviously meant that there's other ways of storing data, and what you put in variants and keeping that semi-structured data that you can extend it with. But it's when you use Data Vault and when you don't. So I mean, I've got some views of the times I think it's the only fit, and then there's the other one. It's probably there's other characteristics that would dictate whether it's the right fit. Maybe the team maturity and controls that they have would be one of them. But
when do you see it as a good fit? Because I mean, honestly, in Matt and I's world, we don't see Data Vault. I would see it's we rarely hear of it, and I would see it. We never really see it in the wild.
It's a European thing. It's probably got another name over there in America. You've called it something else, but Dan, if you're listening, it doesn't really exist. I was joking. It's Dan Litzfine.
So it's like Bigfoot.
Call it something else.
Yeah. I mean, if you're not familiar, it's really.
I'm familiar with it. We just never see it. Like honestly,
Yeah. I mean, where I've seen it, and it's both time it's being the same like driving factor. It's where you have so many source systems changing at the same time, such an unstable foundations that you can't predict what's going to happen, and that you've got a migration to do at the same time as well. We have both of those scenarios. you can't start the project until you've got the contract. You can't do the data. You can't do the testing until you got the date. So it becomes an impossible task unless you've got some elements of solid foundation. So
it's comment here.
Yes. Feels like the biggest question in the past 12 months. They've been quite boring up until that question, is it? Or is that just generally?
What's up, Robert? I think he's from the UK as well. From my
he is. I've connected him. He's recently changed jobs. So hi, Robert.
But yeah, like I said, I don't know if it's a European thing. I know people do it in the States. I know just for Matt and I, we don't really come across Data Vault that much at all. So
yeah. I don't know. Is it more popular in like banking or really big enterprises? We've worked with a couple of companies, but
banking, you've got some solid foundation. You don't change your core banking platform like every 2 weeks or too frequently. So that I wouldn't see as some banks, and I think some actually have. Maybe it's where you got consolidation of lots of different disparate companies that have come together, and then maybe in the banking world it is. But it's a case by case scenario. I've got reviews and when and where it's needed, and I can't see another solution for this one without going forward with a model. Because at the end of the day, you're still going to build your star schemas and your facts dimensions and your SCDs at the end.
Mm-hmm.
It's just how you've got there, and if you've been able to put some controls in place and allow for some flexibility in the unknown, it's a good solution.
Yeah, I mean, it seems interesting in concept, right? Like what is it, like satellite links and hubs and all that fun stuff. Yeah, like I think in spirit, I think that the modeling aspect makes a ton of sense. It'd be something I'd be willing to try out. I mean, I don't think unless a client's down for it.
A whiteboarding session in Salt Lake City.
Yeah, that'd be cool. Yeah, I mean, for us, it either comes down to what we normally see is either traditional star schema or some sort of like wildly denormalized table, honestly, just to take advantage of just massive column stores. Or a third is stream processing into some sort of a drop-in, like a Druid or something like that. So yeah, so it's interesting. But you're talking about like rapidly changing data, for example, right? And I think that's the sort of the paradigm. The reaction we've seen is more sort of just use streams and
it's not more. It's more rapidly changing source systems. So if you've got an ERP changing to another ERP, you've got Salesforce changing to Dynamics, you've got another system changing to SAP or something like that. So it's those are the unknowns which you have no other way of insulating yourself and actually starting until you're actually. It's chicken egg situation. So if you get the ball rolling, at least you get stuff. You get to build those data marts. You can validate them. You can build it right the way through. You build the pipelines, build your foundations, and then when the system comes along, you can plumb it in. I mean, it's a bit in the middle. It gives you the ability to flex at short notice without having an army of data models, which we all know how hard they are.
Yeah, it can get pretty brutal. What does Robert say? Yeah, we had the exact scenario described, integrating dozens of rapidly changing companies through a single flow. Data Vault is critical to that. So yeah,
interesting. I'd be curious to know the reasons they decided against it.
British, you see, Europeans, you see, they understand it.
Yeah. Europeans can teach us a few things.
I'm not European anymore. I keep forgetting it, even though I've been out here.
Yeah, you might be careful.
That's right.
Under 90 days, honest.
Okay. You got a question here. Could you list what tasks are performed by a data engineer?
Do you want to get up Greg's list?
Yeah, I mean, I think Matt and I've talked about it a lot, wrote a lot about this actually, and thought a lot. I mean, I think it really comes down to the data maturity of the company that you're working in. It's going to directly dictate the types of tasks you're doing. There's companies of all sizes that have data engineers, right? Whether they're called that or not. And so a data engineer at a large company, for example, say a FANG, or even today we're talking with a friend who works at a fairly large company, and he said the data engineers there are very, very specialized, right? Like you may be working on Pulsar, for example. Like that's literally all you're doing is that streaming technology and maybe a nuance of that. Whereas if you work at a company that's I wouldn't say lesser data maturity, but maybe because I think there's a certain point where you'd hire a data engineer at a certain level of maturity and not before. And so assuming there is data maturity and you have a data engineer, but maybe they're not big, maybe you wear a lot more hats. Maybe you're putting together the architecture as well as engineering the systems and maintaining the systems, right? So I think it depends on like team size as well as just the type of work that you're doing, the types of things that the company's doing, right? So if you're like Google, for example, where they have a lot of data and a lot of needs, like that's going to be a very specialized role. But if you're at a startup, maybe you're doing everything and probably the entire universe between. What are you guys' thoughts?
Yeah, I tend to agree with that. I mean, one thing we talk a lot about, Joe, is this boundary between architecture and data engineering, which I think in some domains has kind of faded. That is, if you're in a company that just wants to use a lot of managed services, then your role as a data engineer is going to kind of blend in a lot of architecture, because really what you're responsible for is stitching together a lot of these off-the-shelf services rather than building it yourself. Whereas to your point, Joe, like especially if you're at a cloud services company, like you're at Google Cloud Platform, and you're working on the core infrastructure of BigQuery, it's a completely different job. Like then you're really way into the code, into understanding scalability and performance and those kinds of issues. And you're focused on probably just one piece of that infrastructure.
But I would also say too, if you're working on like the underlying infrastructure of BigQuery,
yeah,
like you got some pretty sick skills for one, but those skills may not translate to the broader world. Like
that's right. Yeah.
Like we see this all the time with Google engineers who leave and go to startups. Like I think the architectures I've seen have been wildly different than I would have expected from a traditional software engineer. Like lots of protobufs, lots of crazy stuff. But what are your thoughts, Chris?
So I think if you're looking to move into data engineering, you want that environment that gives you that variety, and that could be anything from just the movement of data to the creation of the teams that are actually consuming it and reporting on it. So to your point, Joe, it will evolve depending on the size of the company, depending on what actual tasks will be on that job spec of what they expect that data engineer to do. It'll totally vary to what size of company, the technology landscape, and what part of the pipeline you're working on. We've talked about this before, as that data engineering role is fragmenting. You've got that ingest part, you've got the data modeling part, and you've really got that infrastructure part as well, which there's an overlap between the ingest part as well. It's getting a big world now. It's a lot of tasks it could be on there.
Yeah, so it's hard to say like what tasks per se. I would say, well, okay, so if I were to break it out for you, tasks, like understand how we talk a lot about lifecycle management. I think this is maybe a good rubric to look at things through. So understand how storage works, understand how to ingest data, understand how to process data, transform it, understand maybe the nuances of whether to use Data Vault, Kimball, not model your data at all, or something like that. So, understand kind of the bigger paradigms out there to kind of understand the design patterns behind data engineering at each stage of the life cycle, and then understand how to serve data and make it useful for downstream users. So are you serving BI, reports, analysts? Are you serving machine learning and data scientists? Like, I think you kind of need to know sort of what the end use case is and work backwards from that to understand the tasks as well. So there's not really a one size fits all. I would say there's sort of I think we're all coming across a general framework. Whereas even a few years ago, there probably really wasn't a general framework for data engineering, because it was very, I think, still tool focused. Like the tasks you'll do in data engineering, well, just use Spark. Like that would have been the answer maybe in 2016
or Pig.
or
in 2016, there's a lot of Pig still, right? I mean, there still is.
Yeah. Whereas now it's kind of like, well, I mean, I don't know. What are you trying to do? Who are you working with? So
right tool for the right job.
Yeah, and maybe that's the change that we've seen in the last 5 to 6 years. It used to be that you could be this hyper myopic developer and just focus on managing Hadoop nodes or something like this and have a very good career. And now suddenly that type of data engineer is, for the most part, a dying breed. I mean, yes, those jobs do exist, but you do need to have a sense of architecture in the big picture, no matter what your day-to-day is.
Mm-hmm. That's a good question. Back to data modeling real quick. I mean, how do you think about data modeling, Chris? Like when would you want, what's that?
Logically,
well, that helps. Speak for yourself. But no, I mean, so if you're given you step into a new client, they want you to model data. What are some of the first questions you start asking?
Well, you need to start off with a conceptual view of what is out there. A definition of what are your level 1 or your level 0 entities, and then start to work it out, because each company will have their own view of what maybe an asset is or something like that. So he's working out what relates, what doesn't relate. I just love dimensional modeling. I used to start with that when I was in the analytics side, but that was, you can understand you're translating the business requirements, what they want to achieve, into you don't know the source systems, you don't care, you're going to work out where that comes from, but working out the dimensions, what will be the facts, what will be the levels of those facts, how you do the aggregation, how would it provide the answers to the requirements that you're given, and then after that, it got boring. After that, working backwards, doing all the rest of it, where you get from. But I mean, OLTP modeling is totally different as well. I mean, you need to look at the whole characteristics of that. Is it a write once? What's the TPS of it? How much is going to come out? Frequency of change. There's so many things that you can you need to cover from the conceptual side to the physical side, and actually how you get everywhere between the two. So, and that's a challenge in itself, maintaining that as well, because everyone in your enterprise architecture world, they like to have their nice thing on their wall, proud of it. This is our estate. Does it really reflect reality now? Probably not, but it's how you keep that all in sync. It's an impossible task, but you need to get it as close as possible. Be as pragmatic as possible as well. Going back to that first point, the business value, sometimes the clock's ticking. You need to get it out there. Do you have to go back to your logical data modeling team to go and add a new attribute at the level 3 and actually propagate it through right the way through, so you can get it into your production system when there's a critical bug on at the moment? No. But it's working out how you do that.
What for you, Chris, has been the practical impact of more NoSQL and more APIs flowing data into these data warehouses or big data systems? I mean, from our perspective, we get this question all the time, like, oh, I have to deal with all this NoSQL data, and not only is it nested, but the schema.
I would say at this point too, we deal with more unstructured data than we do structured data. I
think it's where the two worlds meet, isn't it? And it's the people of what they're used to in that area. So now, for example, using Snowflake, you can go and put that variant data in there with all those hierarchies and loads in it. If they've maybe come from a traditional data warehousing background, they haven't even seen that. Maybe they bypassed it, the big data piece. XML and XPath and stuff like that. That was where I first saw how you start to extract these things out in like key pair things, and they were very, very useful for doing things, especially when all it was a key pair data. You might as well do that. You can bring on new data sources without having to go through all the challenges that they face. But the people now consuming that data, it's not how they used to see it. So being able to, this is why you need some good data modelers. So being able to get that, and maybe it's that ownership of that data piece as well. So
that's a big piece.
If these people are now saying, well, I don't understand this, they're probably they need those data modelers that are building the facts, dimensions, the other part of the pipeline. They're probably not the people that should be writing that. So the people that have come from that DevOps background, or maybe the big data background, that are doing that automation, engineering, infrastructure piece, they're actually going to know about that stuff. I can pivot that out. no flatten, no, yeah, done. Here you go. And yeah, now it's in a consumer. Oh, I understand that. Yeah, I can start using that. But yeah, it depends if you want that data to flow through to your data scientists to go and find that information yourself. It's where you put the controls in place of self-serve and then moaning about having struggling it, or not self-serve and providing a foundation. They say we want to self-serve. Which one do you want?
Yeah, I think it's kind of more where Ternary sits really with Matt and I, right? Like we tend to more. I'd say we don't tend to do a lot of data modeling. Like we're more kind of laying the pipes and the foundation and stuff. I mean, we could certainly do it, but I think a lot of times, when clients engage us, they kind of already have either a data model written and they have to figure out how they're going to get the data in, or like do types of pipelines or something. Other times, though, like you said, it's just data modeling is a tricky one. I still look back at an old book. What was it? Agile Data Warehouse Design or something. It was. I think that's a classic book in the sense where even though I think it's a bit crufty, the methodology is still awesome, where it talked about, okay, so don't just talk about things in terms of like business objects, which I think is like just a really stale term, but think in terms of like who, what, where, when, and how. Like if you're a journalist interrogating or talking to somebody, not interrogating, so it's terrible, but if you're talking to somebody wanting to get facts, and dimensions, think of it in terms of things like a person, time, place, entities, why, which can also be modeled and stuff like that. And then I think that, to me, that was one of the best, I think, discussions. That book was really very good discussion, not just in terms of dimensional modeling per se as it applies to star schemas, but also just a really good discussion in general about just how to think about data as entities and how it ties together.
And data as assets, these are, each of them it's serving something. Collectively, those assets are worth more. Yep. So the more you know about where those assets are, the more value there are in them, because you haven't duplicated them and tarnished them, or not have the wrong information in one, or you're paying for storage twice. Yeah. So it's
Which kind of questions asked. Do data modelers are not really appreciated?
I love them. I love data modelers. Don't worry.
Yeah, we love them too.
Yeah, I mean, my thing with data modeling would be that our favorite kind of data modeler is the kind who brings all this knowledge to the table, but then has the flexibility to deal with these newer paradigms. Like that's golden. If you can do that, if you can bring knowledge of Kimball and Inman and Data Vault, but then say, okay, but we need to partially denormalize, not fully denormalize, but partially denormalize, or we need to handle this data coming out of a Mongo.
Yeah, well, especially in the land of like streaming, which I think we're seeing a lot more. It's like that kind of making a star schema on streaming data is
just not a good paradigm, right?
How does that work?
Yeah, exactly.
It's not real time, is it? So you need it's there may be a need at some point to go and get that data aggregated out of the stream and go and put that to service some long-term historical stuff. But if you want that real-time analysis, you
that's just it.
Yeah.
So I think it's also educating people too. Okay, so like when traditional data modeling, like when is it appropriate, and when would you want to try something different, right? And so that's, I think, part of the education that needs to happen too, because what I see is there's sort of this rigidity in thinking where I can only use Kimball or Inman. That's my school or whatever, or Data Vault, for example. And really, I think what we're all saying is try and know the pros and cons of everything.
Just the patterns.
Patterns.
Well, Google's advice used to be for BigQuery, like, oh, just denormalize everything. It's like, well, how is that supposed to work? Like, what does it even mean to denormalize everything? That's complete nonsense. So you give me some more like flexible but useful advice.
Well, I mean, in that case, then you end up with that, what was that sample data set they have in BigQuery, the Google Analytics sample data, where it's just this like extremely wide, extremely nested data set, which I think is awesome actually. But if you're a dimensional modeler, your eyes will bleed when you look at that thing, or you'll have a stroke or something. So it's horrible.
Don't show it to me.
Mike Nash, what's up, Mike? He always has great questions, and he's we love Mike. Back to value on a business point. Most of the data engineering is hidden value. How do you explain to the client about the value, or do they just want the job done?
I'll go back to that community thing. You need to like share the successes of your business and call out what actually did it. So you've just gone and delivered something for the client. It required the data from some fraud department or something like that. But obviously, there's been a lot of people involved in that. So hearing that in the community and then hearing that this has gone down well. We're gonna have other clients who are gonna do this now. Great teams. That is critical in building that data culture and actually bringing those teams that are working in the engineering departments closer to the business. And now they know that's why the hell they're working till midnight that night for that release for that person that's just been sending them Slack requests the whole time. They've got context to it. Yeah, so I think that's one point.
Well, I mean, the last sentence there, just want the job done. I mean, job done would indicate some sort of value for the job being finished.
Well, there's self-pride, I suppose, isn't it? Engineers want to see I myself, when I was building my facts dimension there, I'd like to see it at the end. You want to see it with the real data in there. It's gone from, Visio to the real world, and you want to see it. So there's as engineers, the data people, we're proud of what we want to do, and we want to see it get to production. So that's one aspect, but I think you also need to show the engineers, the appreciation and the business value that they have, if they did give it. If they cost them a load of money and the project was a total nightmare, maybe they should be told that as well.
What any thoughts, Matt? I mean, we've been thinking, kind of ruminating on this value thing for a bit now.
Yeah, I mean, I think I've seen it with some clients where they were undertaking this huge migration from just a really simple on-prem data warehouse to a cloud data warehouse, plus all the associated infrastructure, access to ML services, all kinds of things. And I think if you can surface those projects and identify how it's actually going to help the consumers. So first of all, your queries are going to run faster. Your Looker BI is going to be way better than what you had before. It's not going to be this like simple, clunky BI system. And here are some specific initiatives that we're going to get from data science that will be possible because we're in a more flexible, scalable system. I think that's what it really comes down to. And so that kind of has to happen at multiple levels. First of all, the leaders of those projects have to really work hard to surface the value. And then second, whoever's above them, the CEO and the president, ideally is willing to allow those teams to shine and say, yeah, this is a priority for the whole business. We're not just saying that we're data driven, but we're actually investing all these resources to make it happen. And then when you get to the finish line, actually show people what's going on. And I think it is kind of a paradigm shift away from the old notion of IT just as a cost sink. IT is, back in the corner with all the data centers and stuff. Like you really have to let people be visible to make this happen. It's a tricky problem because it's not just on the tech side. Like it's not just people like us who can make this possible. Other leaders have to be involved to surface these problems.
But I would say it's not a situation that's unique to, quote, cost centers either, right? Like any department has this, like accounting, for example, like what's the business value of accounting? My question is, well, okay, so what's the business value of not having accounting? What happens if you just axe your accounting department tomorrow and just stop paying invoices or getting them processed? I mean, just stop doing that.
I don't want to upset my accounts department. No, definitely not.
Yeah. So, or if you're, a delivery, in the delivery business. Okay. Well, I don't know. I mean, let's do this experiment. I don't think my drivers add value. I don't think delivery trucks add value. So let's just get rid of them. Let's shut it all down. Even though we're in the delivery business, let's find out what happens. And you're going to be out of business real quick, right? So so I would say it's think of what happened. I would say, almost invert the question and ask, well, if we weren't doing this, what's the cost impact of that? Because again, it's the same question that you always have with cost centers, right? So how can I directly attribute this team's cost to some sort of ROI? And I've been thinking more about this, and I think, well, okay, so there's not really, you can't do like ABC costing on unless you actually that cool, in which case, please let me know how you do that. But ABC costing on a data engineering team, for example, maybe you can, maybe you can't. Tagging does help actually, your resources in the cloud. But that point aside, but we talked earlier about kind of SLAs and stuff, right? So if I'm reducing the time that the analytics team or stakeholders can make decisions or get the data they need to retrain models and deploy models, like to me, that's a win, especially if your company depends on that kind of stuff, right? If your company is an IoT company and data engineering is central to what you do, The cost of you not having data pipelines, for example, if you're an IoT company, is like you're dead. You have nothing. You have no information to transfer and nothing to do. So that's why I kind of invert the question and say, well, if you didn't have this team, what would happen? And if you can answer, well, I guess nothing would happen, then I guess you don't need the team, do you? So it's pretty simple.
Yeah, loads of companies going to go bust now on this advice. Get rid of it.
Well, they'll help with the hiring problem with data engineers then. So
Mike did an interesting post just before here, and I didn't get a chance to comment on it. But I think education at the top is a good thing as well. So I think the post was all about AI and strategy for exec level. So like explaining to them, this is what they do, this is what the engineering do. Like any execs listening, I don't mean this the wrong way. It's sort of like a Janet and John sort of like a simplified view of it, broken down into like, that technology garbage, broken down into things of how they relate. And I think that understanding of what things the data engineering team, which means that AI strategy that you've just gone and signed off 2 million to go and increase the value of your company and compete with your competitors, that's that engineering team down there in the corner on that cost center line. They made it happen. So I think that education thing of exec level of understanding data is going to get bigger and bigger. That the execs need to understand what that ecosystem looks like, what those teams look like, and to your point, Joe, is the risk of losing them. What's the risk of losing that team to maybe a competitor that's going to pay them more? What would happen? It's
nasty out there right now. And also to look at some other points of what Mike asked. Most of the data engineering is a hidden value. I think to your point, Chris, if it's made visible, then it's not hidden anymore, right? And so I think one of the dangers of data in general is that, I keep reading on LinkedIn and other places about how, data just needs to show it has value and all this stuff. But I think it's incumbent upon these teams too to make their wins visible to the business. I mean, there's no better promoter than yourself and your team, right? And it's only by you championing your wins. And I think being frank about your losses at some point too, that's how you get support. But just being hidden doesn't really help you. And the only people who are going to champion you is you. Yeah, it's pretty simple.
And if you accidentally drop a schema, admit it. It's not a problem. We can fix it.
Yeah, tonight we'll get it done. So. But yeah, admitting to failure, though, I think is a big one. It's kind of an aside from this question. It's something I was thinking about yesterday. I think having in general, engineering teams that have a culture, I would say, of psychological safety where you can make mistakes. I think that's great. Yeah. Now, of course, it's different. I think when you're a consulting company with a client, for example. But I think for a consultant, you need to own up to your mistakes soon and clearly. Yep. Don't hide shit.
I haven't dropped any schemas, by the way.
That's good. Chris is a pro.
I had a friend who was running a startup. This was probably 10 years ago. And all their data was in HBase. And someone dropped the production HBase schema. And they worked for like 2 days and they couldn't get it back. It turned out one of their partner companies had tape backups. So that's what they had to do.
That was a lucky one. Yeah. Yeah, it's interesting. Well,
don't do that if you can avoid it.
Yeah. Or if you use Snowflake, you've always got undrop.
Yeah, unless you disable it, which we've also seen people do to save money.
Why would you?
I think the situation was that they were ending up with a massive amount of data history, and so they wanted to cut down on their data storage costs.
Change the time travel.
Yeah. Yeah, so it's just don't use time travel.
Yeah, which you can do.
or disable undrop.
Yeah. That's interesting. Well, now I'm all depressed. So
it's Friday. It's the end of the week.
Awesome.
Go relax, Joe. Go relax.
Yeah. Well.
I've got to go and pack after this.
Yeah, man. Well, cool. It's probably a good place to end it. My kids are about to actually start walking home from school any second now, so I got to go champion them across the street. We recently moved, and the street's not as quiet as it used to be. So, Chris, it's been as always a ton of fun, and let's do this again in a couple of weeks.
So, definitely. Good to see you both.
Sure. All right, audience out there, thanks again for the questions. Mike, everybody else, thanks. And we will see you in a couple weeks. And of course, Monday morning data chat, check us out there. We're going to be doing a discussion on the undercurrents of data engineering. So stay tuned on that riveting topic, I'm sure. So awesome.
Yeah, if you're curious about what data engineers actually do, like a lot of that is undercurrents, as it turns out. So, and
I will say this is actually I would say it's a new concept as well. I have not seen it before, and this will be our first time sort of unveiling this to the public. So if you're curious what the undercurrents are, come check it out. And if you aren't curious what they are, then tune in anyway. So okay, all right. Have a good one, everybody. See ya.